The auction hall smelled like rust, oil, and fear, the kind of place where hope was stripped away and sold to the highest bidder. Bright lights hung from the ceiling, cold and harsh, shining down on a row of prisoners from different worlds. The crowd was made of alien nobles, merchants, warlords, and scavengers, their eyes searching for something to buy, something to use, something to own. On the last platform, under a fading spotlight, a young alien girl stood in chains. Her wrists were bruised, her ankles locked in iron cuffs that left marks on her pale skin. A metal collar glowed red around her neck. She looked thin but not weak, beaten but not broken. Her sharp eyes glared at everyone, like a cornered predator daring anyone to come close. Above her head, a glowing sign showed her number and a single word in bright red, untamable. The auctioneer, a tall insectoid creature with a split jaw and a voice like broken glass, tapped his claw on the podium and hissed, "Lot 974, classified dangerous, rejected by 4 previous owners, no return policy." The crowd chuckled. Whispers filled the air like crawling insects. "Not worth it. She'll bite your hand off. A monster in a pretty skin." A group of lizard-like traders turned away, laughing, while a fat-winged alien spat on the floor in disgust. One by one, the other prisoners before her were sold. They cried, begged, or stayed silent as numbers flashed, hands raised, credits transferred. The hall was filled with the sounds of commerce, greed, and power. But when her turn came, everything slowed down. The auctioneer raised his long arms, his voice booming through the speakers. Opening bid, 100 credits. Untamable, dangerous, but alive. Silence. No hands rose. The crowd looked at her like she was already trash. She did not look away. She stared back at them all, her eyes like burning coals, cold and steady. The auctioneer tried again, lowering the price. Still nothing. A nervous laugh spread through the audience, and then the mocking began. Who would buy that thing? She's broken. She's worth less than scrap. Someone threw an empty cup at the stage, and it bounced off the railing near her feet. She didn't flinch. Her lips tightened, but she didn't move. Pride kept her standing. The auctioneer's voice cracked with frustration. Anyone? 50 credits. 20. 10. Still no hands. Finally, the gavel slammed against the podium. No sale, the auctioneer spat, worthless creature. Guards stepped forward, already dragging away the last sold prisoner. The lights began to dim as the crowd prepared to leave. No one cared. She would be taken back to the cages, maybe shipped to the mines, or thrown into the fighting pits until she was nothing but a memory. Her eyes stared at the floor now, not in fear, but in quiet anger, a kind of fire that refused to die. Just as the last echoes of the auctioneer's voice faded, another sound cut through the room. A single voice. Calm, deep, human. "I'll take her." The entire hall froze. Every alien in the room turned toward the sound. Humans were not supposed to be here. Humans did not come to slave auctions. And yet, at the back of the hall, leaning against a column, a man in a dark coat lowered his hood. His face was calm, his eyes steady, as if this moment belonged to him alone. The auctioneer tilted his head, confused, then forced out a laugh. "A human? You want this one?" The man nodded once. "Yes." The crowd erupted in whispers, a storm of confusion. Why would a human buy her? They're strange creatures. He'll regret it. The auctioneer tried to warn him, waving a claw. "She's dangerous, human. She'll kill you in your sleep. She's bitten off more hands than I can count. She's trouble." But the man didn't move. "I'll take her," he repeated, his voice like a weight pressing down on the air. He walked forward slowly, his boots echoing on the metal floor. The guards tensed as he approached, unsure what he was planning. When he reached the platform, he looked up at the girl. She didn't look away. Her chin tilted slightly higher, daring him to flinch, daring him to turn around like all the others. But he didn't. He just looked at her with eyes that weren't filled with disgust or pity, but something else, something she couldn't name. The auctioneer cleared his throat. 10 credits. Final sale. No returns. The man nodded again. A chip was tossed to the counter. Transaction complete. The lights flickered as the chains around her wrists released with a hiss. The sound of metal falling to the floor echoed louder than any applause. She didn't say thank you. She didn't smile. She stared at him, confused and angry. No one had ever chosen her. Not once. The guards stepped back nervously, almost relieved to let her go. The alien crowd stared in stunned silence, watching the human lead her down the stairs. As they passed, whispers chased them like a shadow. He's insane. She'll rip him apart. Humans, they never learn. The girl walked stiffly beside him, her bare feet scraping against the cold floor. She didn't trust him. She didn't trust anyone. But for the first time, something had changed. She was no longer behind the bars. She was no longer the thing no one wanted. And even though she hated it, a tiny part of her burned with a strange feeling she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Behind them, the auction hall lights shut off one by one, and the sound of the human's footsteps carried through the empty corridor like a promise the galaxy wasn't ready to understand. The ship that carried her away from the auction hall was nothing like the cold metal cages she had known all her life. It was quiet, dark, and alive with a deep hum that seemed to run through the floor and into her bones. She sat on the lower deck, wrapped in a thin gray blanket, staring at the smooth metal walls like a cornered animal. Chains no longer held her, but the invisible weight of years in captivity clung to her shoulders like iron. Her breathing was steady, sharp, trained like someone who learned to survive through silence. The human walked past her without a word, boots striking the floor in slow, steady rhythm. He moved like a man who had nothing to prove and everything already decided. He didn't look at her like the others did, not like she was broken, not like she was dangerous, and not like she was a prize. He didn't look at her at all. He just walked to the control panel at the front of the ship, pressed a few buttons, and the engines roared softly as they left the station behind. The girl kept her distance. Her glowing collar had been removed, but her wrists still bore the scars. She stared at him with narrowed eyes, trying to understand. No one bought something like her without a reason. People who raised their hands at the auctions usually wanted power, control, or pain. But this man didn't fit any of those faces. His jaw was calm. His hands didn't shake, and his voice, when he finally spoke, was low and measured. "Food's in the back," he said without turning around. She didn't respond. She didn't trust words. Words were always lies. She pulled the blanket tighter, pressing her back against the wall. He didn't speak again. He didn't ask her name. He didn't give her one either. Hours passed in silence. The stars outside the ship stretched into long silver lines as they jumped into slipstream. She had seen the stars from cages before, always through dirty glass or bars. This time there was no barrier, only cold freedom that didn't feel real. She thought about running. Her eyes scanned the ship for exits, for vents, for anything she could use. She had escaped cages before, but never from ships like this. It was built like a human warship, sleek, efficient, deadly. She had heard the stories of humans, of their quiet power, of how they fought not like beasts but like storms. She hated that those stories made her heart beat faster. Late into the night cycle, when the hum of the engines was all she could hear, she finally moved. Her bare feet touched the floor softly as she crept toward the cockpit. The human sat in the pilot's chair, staring at the stars ahead. She moved like a shadow, silent, steady, ready to strike. She reached for the blade she had hidden beneath the blanket, a thin piece of metal stolen from the floor panel hours ago. She raised it slowly, her breath steady, and stepped closer. But before she could act, his voice stopped her cold. "If you're going to do it," he said softly, "do it right." She froze. His head hadn't turned. He was still staring at the stars. Slowly, he raised one hand and pointed at his throat. "Right here," he said calmly, quick and quiet. "But if you miss, I'll break your arm before you can blink." His tone wasn't cruel. It was flat, like someone talking about the weather. She hated how calm he was. No one had ever faced her without fear. Her grip tightened on the blade. She took a step forward, heart pounding. But his stillness was heavier than chains. She lowered the blade slowly, sliding it back into the folds of the blanket. He didn't look at her. He just said, "Good choice," and returned to flying. She turned away, furious at herself. No one had ever stopped her without moving. No one had made her feel so small without lifting a hand. She hated him for it. She went back to the corner and sat down, clutching the metal piece like it was the only thing left in the world she could trust. The next few days passed the same way. He spoke little, gave no orders, and kept the ship steady. He didn't touch her, didn't threaten her, didn't even ask questions. She didn't know whether that made her feel safe or scared. She waited for the cruelty to come, the kind that always came after the calm. But it didn't. One morning, when the ship drifted through a quiet sector of space, he placed a bowl of warm food near her. "Eat," he said. She stared at the bowl like it was a trap. She didn't touch it for hours. When hunger finally won, she ate every bit, her hands shaking even though she tried to hide it. He didn't say anything. He didn't even watch her. That unsettled her more than any chains could have. One night, while the stars burned like distant fires, she finally spoke. Her voice was rough, like someone who hadn't used it in a long time. "Why me?" she asked. The words fell into the air like broken glass. He didn't turn. "What?" he said simply. She swallowed hard. "Why did you buy me?" Her voice cracked on the last word, a word she hated, a word she had lived under her entire life. He was silent for a long time, as if he didn't want to give her the comfort of an easy answer. Then, finally, he said, "Because no one else did." She blinked, confused. "Because no one saw you," he added softly. The words cut through her like a blade. She didn't know why they hurt. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not as a thing. Not as a monster. Just as someone. She turned her head away quickly, hiding the tears that burned at the corner of her eyes. She had promised herself long ago never to cry again. The days that followed were quieter, but something had changed. She no longer tried to escape. She no longer raised her blade in the night. She watched him more closely, trying to understand this strange, quiet human who didn't act like any owner she'd ever known. He worked in silence, repairing parts of the ship, checking star charts, and sometimes just sitting and staring out into the void like he was searching for something lost. He didn't look like a hero. He didn't look like a monster. But something about him made her heart uneasy. On the 7th day, the ship dropped out of slipstream near a dark stretch of space where no stars shined. She didn't know what was out there, but the look in his eyes when the ship slowed made her uneasy. He walked past her, down into the lower deck, and for the first time since she boarded, she followed him, not out of fear, but because something deep inside told her everything was about to change. As the ramp lowered and the cold air of deep space brushed against her face, she saw lights in the distance. Not stars. Ships. Many ships. And she realized this man wasn't just a stranger. He was leading her into something bigger. Something she didn't understand yet. Something that would change everything. The cold stars drifted outside the viewport like distant eyes, watching everything in silence as the human ship slowly moved toward the shadowed cluster of vessels waiting in the dark. The alien girl stood near the railing, barefoot, wrapped in the same thin gray blanket she had clung to since the auction, her sharp golden eyes scanning every shape in the void. She had seen many ships in her life, warships, slave transports, pirate cruisers, but nothing like this. These ships moved like they weren't bound by the laws of space. They were quiet, too quiet, their engines giving off no readable signature, their hulls black as night, reflecting no light, absorbing it instead. She felt something crawl up her spine. These weren't merchant ships. These weren't patrol ships. This was something else. Something dangerous. The human at the helm didn't speak. He adjusted the controls with slow, precise movements, as if he had done this 1,000 times. A soft pulse came from one of the black ships, not a signal she recognized. It was more like a heartbeat, low, rhythmic, ancient. The ship responded automatically with a pulse of its own, one she hadn't even noticed existed in its systems. For a moment, She felt like she was inside a beast that was speaking to another beast in a language no one else could understand. Her fists clenched. The idea that she didn't understand made her feel small, exposed, weak, something she hated more than chains. When they reached docking range, the human finally stood up. He walked past her like he always did, calm, quiet, steady. "Stay close," he said, not as a command but as a fact. She frowned. Her instincts screamed not to follow anyone, not to trust anyone. But something about the tone of his voice, flat, certain, pulled her forward. She didn't answer. She simply walked behind him as the airlock hissed open. The ramp extended into a corridor dimly lit by thin blue strips of light running along the floor. A mist hung in the air, like fog trapped inside a machine. The girl scanned every shadow, waiting for the moment the trap would spring. She had spent her entire life being bought and caged. This couldn't be different. In her mind, no one did anything for nothing. There was always a cost, always a trick hidden beneath the surface. But as they stepped into the corridor, no guards came. No chains snapped. No loud orders barked in alien tongues. Instead, the silence felt thick, almost sacred. They walked deeper into the station until they reached a wide, circular chamber. It was carved out of black metal with veins of glowing blue running through the walls like rivers. At the center stood a tall holographic spire, spinning slowly, showing thousands of star systems. She stared at it, her breath catching without her permission. She had never seen something so advanced. Not even the council fleets had technology like this. She turned to the human, but he was already walking ahead. 3 figures appeared on the far side of the room, stepping out of the shadows. They were humans too. She froze. It had been years since she'd seen more than one human at a time. Humanity rarely showed itself anymore, disappearing into its corner of the galaxy after the wars. And yet here they were, calm, silent, watching her with sharp eyes that didn't flinch. The tallest one, a woman with short black hair and a scar across her jaw, looked at the man who had bought her. "You brought her," she said in a low voice, not surprised, not angry, just stating the fact. The man nodded. She was left to rot. The woman's gaze shifted to the alien girl. It wasn't the look of a slaver or a soldier. It was something else. It was the way predators looked at something that might be dangerous. Not weak. Not worthless. Dangerous. The girl took a step back automatically, her heart pounding hard against her ribs. She wasn't afraid of cruelty. She had lived with it. She was afraid of people who didn't underestimate her. Those were the ones who could break her for real. The woman tilted her head, almost curious. "She's small," she said, "but I can feel it. She's not just another runaway." The man nodded slightly. They called her untamable. The room went silent for a heartbeat. The other humans exchanged a glance that the girl couldn't understand. It wasn't fear. It wasn't interest. It was recognition. She hated it. She hated being talked about like she wasn't there. "Why am I here?" she spat, her voice sharp like broken glass. The woman smiled faintly, but it wasn't kind. "Because you're not like the rest," she answered. "And because they left you behind." The girl's throat tightened. That word, left, hit something buried deep, something she didn't want to feel. She had been abandoned so many times that it had become a part of her. But this time felt different. These humans didn't leave her to rot. They brought her here for a reason she couldn't see. And that terrified her. The woman took a step closer, slow, deliberate. "You've survived longer than most of your kind. You've escaped things that would have broken anyone else. But you already know that, don't you?" The girl's jaw clenched. She wanted to fight. She wanted to snarl and show her teeth like the animal they called her. But something about the woman's calm voice made the rage fall apart before it reached her mouth. The man who had bought her placed a small device on the table. A projection appeared, a file with her face, her name, and a long list of violent incidents, escape records, and combat notes. It was like watching someone read the scars on her soul. She felt exposed, naked, stripped of the last thing she had, her mystery. "You've been running your whole life," the woman said softly. But now someone's going to find you no matter where you go. The girl stiffened. Who? She demanded. The woman pointed at the file. A single symbol appeared at the bottom. A crest. She had seen it once before, on the ships that conquered her world. A symbol belonging to a species feared even among warlords. Them, the woman said. And they won't stop this time. You were never supposed to make it out of that auction. The girl's stomach twisted. She wanted to deny it, to tell them they were lying. But she remembered the laughter in the auction hall, the way they looked at her like she was trash. It all made sense now. She wasn't abandoned by accident. She was abandoned because they thought no one would ever save her. She wasn't supposed to matter. The man finally spoke. You do now, he said simply. The words echoed in the chamber like a spark in dry wood. For a moment, she forgot how to breathe. She stared at him, searching his face for the trick, for the cruelty, for the lie. But there was nothing. Just that same calm she hated. The woman stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. You can leave, she said. No one's keeping you here. But if you stay, you'll have to decide what you want to be. Someone who was thrown away or someone they'll regret losing. The girl stood frozen in place, the cold metal floor pressing against her bare feet. The weight of a future she never asked for pressing against her chest. She had lived a life where every choice was made for her. Now, for the first time, the choice was hers. She didn't know whether to run or to fight, but something inside her, the same fire that made her untamable, whispered that this was not the end of her story. This was the beginning. Outside the station, the silent human fleet waited, black as the void. And for the first time in years, she felt something burn inside her that wasn't hatred. It was the faint, terrifying shape of a future. The lights of the station dimmed as the ships outside aligned into formation, their black hulls glinting faintly against the distant stars like silent hunters preparing to move. Inside the chamber, the girl sat alone on a metal bench near the lower deck. She could still feel the weight of the woman's words echoing in her skull. You were never supposed to make it out of that auction. The thought looped over and over in her mind, louder than the steady hum of the ship's core. Her chest felt tight, as if the air had grown too heavy to breathe. For years she believed being abandoned was just misfortune. But this was something colder. Someone had wanted her erased. And now she needed to know why. She clenched her fists until her nails bit into her palms. She hated feeling small. She had spent her life surviving cages, chains, and beatings, convincing herself she didn't need anyone. But these humans, they didn't act like the others. They didn't chain her. They didn't sell her. They didn't even fear her. And that unsettled her more than any prison. Trust was a weapon, and she had spent too long on the wrong end of it. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. The man who had bought her appeared at the doorway, as calm as ever, wearing that same plain black coat with no insignia. His face gave nothing away. He didn't smile, didn't frown, didn't speak until she met his eyes. You should eat, he said simply. She didn't respond. She turned her head away, biting the inside of her cheek to keep her voice trapped where it belonged. But he didn't leave. He stepped closer, placed a small tray of food beside her, and leaned against the wall. He didn't look like a savior, and he didn't act like a captor. He was just there. And somehow, that was worse. They were going to kill you after the auction, he said finally, voice low. Her head snapped toward him. He didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the far wall like he was talking about the weather. They left you there because it would draw less attention than an execution. She stared at him, her throat tight. Why? She whispered, almost against her will. He met her eyes then, and for the first time, she saw something behind the calm. Not fear. Not pity. Understanding. Because of what you are, he said. Not what they said you were. What you really are. Her heart pounded. She didn't want to hear it. She didn't want to remember. But he pressed a button on a small control pad and a holographic projection flickered into existence before her. A detailed report filled with alien symbols, maps, genetic scans, and flashing red warnings. At the center was a single image. Her. A child. Her wrists bound, her body half buried in the ruins of her homeworld. A line of text burned bright beneath the photo, subject class Omega. Species, forbidden. She jerked to her feet, stumbling back. Turn it off, she hissed, but he didn't. Her chest heaved as old memories bled through like cracks in a dam. The ships above her world. The sky burning. The sound of soldiers dragging her through the ash. She could still smell the smoke in her dreams. What is this? She spat. The man lowered the device and spoke slowly, as if every word mattered. You are not just another slave. You are the last of a species they erased. They wiped your world clean because they were afraid of what you could become. Her breath caught. She had always known there was something different about her. The guards had whispered about her strength. The buyers had whispered about the things she survived. But no one had ever told her why. They called your people a threat, he continued, because you weren't controllable. They couldn't break your kind. So they decided to destroy it instead. A wave of cold rushed through her chest. She remembered the flames. The soldiers. The silence that came after. She had been just a child when it happened. They had stripped everything from her. Her name, her world, her future, and left her with nothing but a number burned into her file. Her throat burned with a rage she hadn't felt in years. Then why did you buy me? She demanded, her voice shaking between fury and fear. Because I don't believe what they believe, he answered simply. Because I've seen what the council does when it's afraid. And because I think they made a mistake. She stared at him, unable to speak. No one had ever said something like that to her. No one had ever said she was a mistake the galaxy made, not the other way around. The door hissed open again, and the scarred woman stepped in. We're being watched, she said bluntly. 3 council ships picked up our signal. They're not close, but they'll follow. The man didn't look surprised. Let them, he replied. We're not the ones hiding. The girl's heart skipped. Council ships, she whispered. The woman turned to her, her sharp eyes scanning the girl's face. They're not after us, she said. They're after you. They've been after you since the day your world burned. The girl's pulse roared in her ears. She remembered their crest. The one she had seen carved into the side of the soldiers' dropships. She had thought it was just a symbol of her nightmares. But it was real. They were still out there. And they were coming. The man looked at her steadily. You can run. I won't stop you. But if you do, they'll find you again, and they won't keep you alive a second time. She clenched her fists, trembling. And if I stay? She asked. The woman's scar caught the faint blue light as she smiled, not kindly, but like someone who had already made peace with the fight ahead. Then we make them regret ever touching your world. The silence that followed was thick, stretching across the room like a storm on the horizon. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips. She had run all her life. Run from cages. From beatings. From fear. But now, for the first time, she wasn't facing an owner or a guard. She was facing a choice. The woman turned away, giving the girl space to breathe. The man said nothing, but his calm presence filled the room like an anchor against the chaos. Her throat tightened as she whispered, I don't know how to fight them. The man tilted his head slightly. You don't have to, he said. You just have to stop running. Her eyes burned, not with tears but with fire. She didn't even realize she was standing straighter now, her shoulders no longer hunched like prey. The rage she had buried under layers of pain and silence was rising, and it didn't scare her anymore. It gave her strength. Outside the ship, the human fleet began to move, silent and precise, shifting into combat formations like shadows turning into blades. In the distance, the faint shapes of council ships shimmered into view, their presence like a storm crawling toward them. For the first time in her life, the girl wasn't alone in the dark. She wasn't a slave. She wasn't forgotten. She was a spark, and something far greater was about to burn. The stars outside the viewport seemed colder that night. The human fleet moved like a living beast through the dark. Dozens of black ships in perfect, silent formation, no lights, no radio chatter, no wasted energy. The alien girl stood near the forward deck, her hands resting against the railing as the void stretched endlessly before her. She had spent her life trapped in cages and auction halls, surrounded by filth and noise, but this silence was different. It wasn't the silence of chains. It was the silence before something powerful broke loose. Her heart beat against her chest in a steady rhythm, matching the deep hum of the ship's engines. She wasn't used to the sound of her own heartbeat meaning something other than fear. The man walked past her toward the central console, his coat swaying lightly with each step, face calm as always, eyes sharp. The scarred woman followed, her boots striking hard against the floor. Every movement on the ship felt deliberate now. The alarms had been disabled, but every human crew member was alert, their eyes locked on distant signals. 3 council ships were already closing in, small compared to the fleet, but dangerous. These were not merchant ships. They were hunters. The girl felt the tension in the air without anyone having to explain it. She wasn't stupid. She knew a battle was coming. But what unsettled her wasn't the threat. It was the fact that the humans around her didn't seem afraid. They moved like they had done this before, like war was an old, familiar language they didn't need to speak out loud. It was terrifying and strangely comforting. The woman placed a hand on the holographic table and the projection lit up, showing the approaching ships like 3 red wolves in a field of black. "They've split their formation," she said, her voice flat, controlled. 2 forward, 1 flanking. Classic council tactic. "They're trying to trap us." The man nodded slowly. "Let them try." His voice didn't rise. He didn't give speeches. He just spoke like someone who already knew how the story would end. The girl narrowed her eyes. She wanted to ask why they weren't panicking, why they weren't running. But before she could speak, the first alert came through. The council fleet was hailing them. A flickering holoscreen projected into the air, showing the cold, sharp face of a council officer. His silver uniform gleamed, his thin lips curved in the kind of smile only people who believe they own everything wear. "You have something that belongs to the council," the officer said smoothly, his voice like oil. "Surrender her, and your ships may leave in peace." The man didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the girl. "No," he said simply. 1 word. Quiet. Heavy. Final. The officer's smile vanished. "Do you know what you're protecting?" he hissed. "That creature is a weapon. A failed experiment. A remnant of a species that should have been erased. We gave you humans a place in this galaxy, and this is how you repay us? By hiding monsters." The woman leaned forward slightly, her scar catching the faint light. "Funny," she said coolly. "We stopped listening to the council a long time ago." The officer's face darkened. "Then you've chosen death." The signal cut out. The room was quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It was heavier now, sharper, charged like the air before lightning strikes. The girl felt something cold crawl up her spine. Her hands clenched into fists. She knew what the officer said wasn't entirely a lie. Her species was dangerous. She had felt the power sleeping under her skin her whole life, the thing that made everyone fear her, the thing she had learned to hide. But now, as those ships came closer, something in her chest shifted. She was tired of being afraid of what she was. The man turned to her, and for the first time since she had met him, there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Not pity, not anger, purpose. "They are here for you," he said quietly. "But we're not handing you over. That means they're going to fight. And when they do, the galaxy will hear their screams." The woman cracked a smile that wasn't kind. "Let's remind them why they stopped fighting humans centuries ago." The ship trembled as the fleet shifted positions, silent and precise. No alarms blared. No chaotic shouting. Just clean, disciplined motion. It was beautiful in a terrifying way. The girl moved toward the window, watching as the 3 council ships cut through the dark, their bright engines burning like arrogant suns. The humans didn't move back. They advanced. Then the battle began. It started without a sound, just the flash of movement. The human fleet didn't fire first. They never did. They waited for the council ships to make the first mistake. The moment the first bolt of plasma screamed through space, the black ships reacted like they had been waiting their entire lives for that shot. They split formation with impossible speed, engines flaring white for a heartbeat before going dark again. The plasma bolts passed through empty space. The girl gripped the railing as the human ships surrounded their attackers with surgical precision. No chaos. No wasted shots. The first human volley hit like a hammer, silent railguns slicing through shields like paper. One council ship shattered under the impact, blooming into fire and debris. The second tried to retreat, but human ships locked it in place like wolves pulling down prey. The third ship broke formation, panicked, fired wildly into the dark. The humans didn't even flinch. They moved around it like a storm around a tree. The girl's breath caught as she realized how terrifying they truly were. She had always heard stories of human war fleets, how they were quiet, efficient, merciless. She had thought they were myths. They weren't. They were worse. And then, something inside her broke free. She could feel the energy in the air, sharp and burning like lightning. It started as a pulse behind her eyes, spreading down her spine like fire. She stumbled, gasping. The woman turned sharply. "It's happening," she muttered. The man was already moving toward her. Her vision blurred. She saw the council ships burning. She saw the stars spinning. She heard whispers, not in the room, but inside her skull. It was her power, the thing the galaxy tried to bury, the thing they feared. It was calling to her. "Breathe," the man said, standing close but not touching her. "Don't fight it. Control it." She clenched her teeth, every nerve in her body screaming. She remembered the cages, the chains, the laughter. She remembered being left to rot like she was nothing. And now, for the first time, she wasn't powerless. She didn't push the power away. She let it rise. A shockwave of blue light burst from her chest, racing through the ship like a wave of pure force. The humans didn't flinch. They had expected it. Outside, the remaining council ship suddenly froze mid-maneuver, its systems crackling, engines dying. She could feel it, like the ship itself was under her fingertips. Her breath shook. The energy poured through her veins like fire and frost all at once. For years, they had told her she was dangerous. For the first time, she understood why. She wasn't just dangerous. She was power itself. The council ship twisted, its hull splitting as systems collapsed under her will. And then, silence. Only the drifting debris of 3 destroyed ships remained. She fell to her knees, gasping, the world spinning around her. The man crouched in front of her, eyes steady. "They'll come again," he said. "Bigger ships. More soldiers. But now they know what you are." The woman crossed her arms, a sharp grin cutting across her face. "Good," she said. "Let them bring everything they've got. They'll learn what happens when they push humanity too far." The girl looked out at the wreckage drifting in the dark. She wasn't sure what scared her more, the power inside her or the way these humans accepted it without flinching. They didn't fear her. They saw her. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a weapon someone else owned. She felt like a storm they had chosen to unleash together. Outside, the human fleet moved silently through the debris, their black hulls gleaming faintly in the dying light of the council ships. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. But this time, she wasn't the girl in chains anymore. She was something else entirely. Something the galaxy would remember. The battlefield drifted in silence, a graveyard of council ships and burning debris floating like dying stars. The alien girl sat at the edge of the viewing deck, her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes fixed on the wreckage outside. The void had always felt cold and endless to her, a place where she was nothing but a shadow, but tonight it was different. For the first time, the stars were quiet because she had silenced them. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears, still raw from the power she had unleashed. She could still feel it, like a living flame under her skin, something old, something that had been waiting for years to break free. She had not fully understood what she was capable of until she watched a fleet burn without touching it. And she could not decide if that made her feel free or dangerous. The man stood a few feet away, leaning against the metal railing. He hadn't said a word since the battle ended. He didn't need to. His silence wasn't the silence of judgment. It was something else. A quiet acceptance. The kind she had never known before. The scarred woman sat near the control station, tapping through tactical data and scanning the remains of the council ships, her face as calm as the night outside. No one on the ship looked at the girl like a monster. No one whispered or flinched. They moved like soldiers who had expected this all along. That unsettled her more than fear ever could. She turned her head toward the man, anger and confusion twisting inside her chest. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" she demanded, her voice rough, cracking through the stillness. The man didn't move. He let the silence stretch for a long moment before answering softly, "Because I know what you are." Her breath caught. She waited for the word, weapon, monster, curse, but it didn't come. "And what am I?" she whispered. He looked at her then, eyes steady, voice low. "You're proof." She frowned, not understanding. The woman turned her chair toward them, crossing her arms. "The council tried to erase your people because they feared what they couldn't control," she said. "They thought if they buried the last of your kind, the galaxy would forget. But they didn't count on one thing: humans don't follow their rules." The girl felt the weight of those words pressing on her chest. All her life she had been told she was dangerous. She believed it. She carried it like chains. And now, for the first time, someone wasn't telling her to hide it. Someone was daring her to own it. Outside, the debris field began to drift apart as the human fleet realigned. Small recovery craft glided through the wreckage like quiet predators, retrieving data cores, weapon caches, and anything useful. The humans moved with a discipline she had never seen in other species. They were quiet, efficient, unstoppable. The girl found herself watching them and wondering how a people like this could be feared yet never understood. Maybe the galaxy had made the same mistake with them that it had made with her. The woman stepped closer, her boots echoing softly on the deck. "The council will not stop," she said. "Those were just scouts. They'll send more. They'll come in numbers that shake star systems. You need to understand what that means." The girl stiffened. "They are coming for me," she said quietly. The woman didn't deny it. "Yes, but they'll find us waiting." The man finally stepped away from the railing and approached her slowly, stopping only a few steps in front of her. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "You've spent your whole life running," he said. "From cages. From pain. From them. If you keep running, they'll catch you again. But if you stand here with us, they won't." The girl wanted to laugh, to tell him she wasn't like them. But the image of the council ships exploding still burned in her mind. She had spent years believing she was powerless when, in truth, she was something they feared. Something they tried to erase. And these humans, these quiet, dangerous humans, had seen that before anyone else. "Why me?" she whispered again. But this time it didn't sound like anger. It sounded like something smaller, something she wasn't used to admitting. The man tilted his head slightly. "Because we don't save what's easy," he said. "We save what matters." The words struck deeper than she wanted them to. Her throat tightened. No one had ever said she mattered. Not once. She looked away, trying to hold back the storm building behind her eyes. But the woman didn't give her time to sink into the dark. "You have a choice now," she said. "You can be the girl they abandoned at the auction. Or you can be the storm that makes them wish they hadn't." A sudden alarm flashed across the console. The woman turned sharply, tapping a command into the controls. The holographic display filled the room again, showing a cluster of council ships, larger this time. A fleet. 20 signatures and climbing. Their engines burned like a storm on the horizon. "They are here," the woman said calmly. The air shifted. No panic. No fear. The humans on the ship moved with quiet precision, voices low, movements smooth. Fleet channels lit up with short, clipped orders. Ships began to position themselves in an expanding formation, surrounding the girl's location like a shield. She felt her stomach twist. This wasn't a rescue anymore. This was war. The man turned to her. "If you want to run, this is the last chance you'll get," he said. She didn't move. She stared at the hologram of the incoming fleet, her heartbeat pounding like a war drum. The girl she used to be, the one in the auction hall, in chains, in cages, would have run without looking back. But that girl was already gone. She had burned with those council ships. Her voice came out steady. No more running. The woman grinned, a wolfish smile. Good. Outside, the fleet came into view, a river of light cutting through the void. The humans did not retreat. Their ships stayed perfectly still, waiting. It was a kind of defiance she had never witnessed before, a silence louder than any roar. Then, slowly, she stepped forward, away from the wall, away from the corner she had kept to since the auction. For the first time, she stood beside them, not behind them. The man nodded once, as if he'd known this moment was coming all along. Then let's make history, he said. As the enemy fleet closed in, the girl reached for the power that now lived in her veins. It didn't burn this time. It hummed like something that belonged to her. She could feel the ships in the distance like insects crawling on her skin. Every engine pulse, every energy signature, every ounce of their fear. And buried beneath it all was the same arrogance she had seen her entire life. The belief that she was just a thing to be owned, hunted, erased. But this time, she wasn't the prey. The first wave of council ships launched their weapons. The void filled with streaks of light as missiles and plasma beams screamed toward the human fleet. And for the second time, she let go. Her power surged like a tidal wave, meeting their fire mid-space. The energy didn't just block it, it swallowed it whole. The council fleet's formation shattered. Human ships moved like blades, cutting through the chaos, silent and precise. Explosions bloomed like dying stars, lighting up the black. The girl felt the power move through her like wind through a storm. This time, she wasn't afraid of it. She commanded it. The humans followed without hesitation, trusting her power the way no one ever had. Together, they became something the galaxy had long feared but never truly understood. A storm forged between the untamable and the unbroken. When the last council ship cracked apart, burning and silent, the stars returned to their quiet watch. The battlefield was theirs. The humans didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They simply moved back into formation, as if they had just taken their first breath of a much longer war. The girl stood at the front deck, chest rising and falling, the power slowly fading back beneath her skin. She wasn't shaking anymore. She wasn't caged anymore. She wasn't unwanted. The man stepped up beside her, his voice quiet. "They'll tell stories about this," he said. She didn't answer. She just stared out into the dark, where the enemy had fallen. For the first time in her life, the future didn't look like a cell. It looked like open space. Endless. Waiting. And this time, she wasn't afraid of what came next. Because now the galaxy would remember the girl they tried to abandon. And the humans who stood beside her. The void was quiet after the storm, too quiet. The battlefield floated around them, a graveyard of burned council ships and drifting debris that caught the distant light of stars like dying embers. The alien girl stood at the center of the command deck, no longer clutching herself like a prisoner, no longer hiding behind walls or shadows. She had stood against the enemy fleet with her own power, and the galaxy would never forget what happened here. She could feel it deep in her bones, like the low hum of a storm that hadn't fully passed. Her breath was steady, her heartbeat strong, but something in the silence told her this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something much bigger, something no one could undo. The man moved through the deck like he always did, silent but unshakable, his coat swaying behind him as the last tactical reports flickered across the screens. The scarred woman leaned against the console, wiping dried blood from a small cut on her temple, a grin stretching across her face. Around them, human crew members worked with the kind of cold efficiency that came from years of living in the shadows of a galaxy that had once feared them. There were no cheers, no celebrations, no songs of victory. This wasn't the kind of war that made people celebrate. This was the kind that changed everything. The girl walked slowly toward the wide observation window. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass. Hair wild, eyes burning faintly with the remnants of her power, skin still streaked with the dirt of the auction hall where this had all begun. But there was something new in her face now, something she hadn't seen before. Strength. Control. Not the kind that came from claws and fury, but the kind that came from standing up and not looking away. She lifted her hand slowly, pressing it to the glass, staring at the vast darkness ahead. The council would not stay silent after what she did. They would bring more fleets. They would bring everything they had. She knew this, but for the first time in her life, the idea of them coming didn't make her want to run. The woman joined her at the window, arms crossed over her chest. "You know," she said quietly, "I've seen plenty of soldiers with power, but not like yours." The girl didn't answer. She wasn't used to praise. She didn't trust it. The woman tilted her head slightly, studying her. "You changed the battlefield tonight," she continued. "Not just with your power, but with what you are. The council didn't expect this. They thought they'd erased your kind forever. Now they know they didn't." Her words weren't soft or warm. They were sharp, deliberate, like a blade meant to remind her what was coming. They'll hunt harder now. The girl's jaw tightened. "I'm not running," she said quietly. Her voice didn't shake this time. It carried weight. The woman smirked, the corner of her mouth lifting like she approved. "Good," she said. "Then we fight." Footsteps echoed on the deck as the man approached. His presence filled the room without him needing to raise his voice. The crew fell silent as he stood beside them, his gaze fixed on the burning wreckage drifting outside. "The council has already sent transmissions," he said. "They've declared the incident an act of rebellion. Every colony in the outer systems will hear it by morning. They'll paint us as monsters, as traitors, as the danger in the dark. That's how they work." The woman didn't look surprised. "Let them," she said with a low laugh. "They've been telling ghost stories about us for years. This time, the ghost will answer." The girl looked at him, her throat tightening. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You could have left me there. You could have handed me over and avoided all this." His eyes met hers, calm but carrying a quiet fire. "Because the council has been writing the same story for centuries," he said. "Someone has to change the ending." She didn't know what to say. She had spent so long being a forgotten number in someone else's story. The idea that anyone would fight to give her a place in theirs felt impossible. And yet here she was, alive, standing, and stronger than she had ever been. The alarm system beeped softly, not the scream of incoming fire, but a signal from the outer perimeter. The woman glanced at the display. "They are watching," she muttered. "Scouts. Nothing close yet." The man nodded. "They're not ready to attack. Not yet. They're trying to understand what happened." He stepped closer to the window, his silhouette outlined by the glow of the distant stars. "Let them look," he said softly. "Let them see what they tried to erase." The girl turned her gaze to the dark beyond the glass, where the first faint sensor echoes of new ships were already blinking. She could feel the pull in her chest, the same electric hum she'd felt before the battle. Her power wasn't quiet anymore. It lived inside her like a heartbeat, steady and waiting. She thought back to the auction hall, the laughter, the humiliation, the way no one had wanted her. She remembered the moment his voice had cut through that room like a blade. "I'll take her." She had thought it meant more chains. Instead, it became the beginning of something she couldn't have imagined. The woman placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, not soft, but solid, grounding. "You know what they'll call you after this?" she asked. The girl shook her head. "They'll call you a weapon," the woman said. "A monster. A symbol of everything they fear." Her voice lowered, almost like a whisper. "Good. Let them." The girl's lips pressed into a thin line. She was done being afraid of their words. For years, the galaxy had called her dangerous. It was time they learned why. The fleet outside began to shift again, moving into a looser formation, preparing for what would come next. The humans didn't need orders. They already knew. The war wasn't tomorrow. The war had already started the moment one human had raised his hand at that auction. The girl could feel the tension crackling through the air like static before a storm. But it wasn't the same as the fear she used to live in. This was different. This was strength. She stepped forward, standing beside the man at the window. For the first time, she wasn't walking behind him. She wasn't the shadow. She was standing as his equal. "They'll come for me," she said, her voice steady, fierce. "Then we'll make them remember why they should have left me alone." He nodded once, nothing dramatic, just the simple agreement of someone who knew what kind of war they were walking into. In the dark distance, the faint outlines of new enemy ships flickered to life, far away but drawing closer. The Council wasn't finished. The galaxy wasn't finished. But neither was she. The man glanced sideways at her. "This isn't just their war anymore," he said quietly. "It's yours too. You can be the weapon they fear or the storm they can't stop. Your choice." She looked out at the stars. Once, they had felt like unreachable lights hanging over a world that didn't care about her. Now they felt closer, almost waiting. A slow, burning resolve settled in her chest. She had spent years as the girl no one wanted, as the forgotten thing left behind. Now, she was something they would never forget. The scarred woman laughed lowly, a sound like steel sliding from a sheath. "Then let's give them something to fear," she said. The girl didn't smile. She didn't need to. The storm was already coming. She was the storm. The humans were the fire beneath it. And the Council, the mighty, arrogant Council, was about to learn what happens when you try to erase someone who refuses to die. Outside the window, the human fleet began to move again, black against the stars. The war was waiting, and so was she. This time, no chains, no cages, no auctions, just fire, just her, just the storm.